to be able to see. All right, so I am going to mute myself and allow Ms. Carlson to take over.
All right, so good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and definitely excited to get this information out. I know that there's a new law in place that all seniors have to fill out a FAFSA before they graduate. So this is even more important so that everybody knows what they're doing and how to get this done, as it's not the easiest process, but it's really not difficult once you get it started. And really, the website gives you a lot of tools so that you can get this done. And if you have any questions, there's a lot of help answers on the website as well. So hopefully this will give you a little bit less anxiety about doing it, but we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, so I don't really want to read the whole quote, but definitely education is the biggest investment for the future. So that is why we're here, to help continue your students' education and make it an easier transition from high school to college. So the things that we're going to talk about tonight, it's a lot, so bear with me. And of course, if you have questions, please ask in the chat. But we're going to discuss basic information as well as specific. But what is financial aid? What the types of aid and resources are, cost of attendance and financial need, the FAFSA, which is the application, the expected family contribution, which is what we use to determine the amount of aid that the student qualifies for, and then scholarships. Okay, so financial aid, definitely very important to students that are trying to get into college that might not be able to pay for it on their own. So it's any grant, scholarship, loan, or paid employment offered to help a student meet college expenses. College expenses may include tuition and fees, books, housing, food, and transportation. So a lot of people might misunderstand what financial aid is. Sometimes people will get an offer and see that they're being offered a grant and a loan, but think that financial aid is just the free money. So they always ask, well, what about my financial aid? I see I got a loan, but what about financial aid? Financial aid is loans and grants. So that is probably one of the biggest misunderstandings. All right, so cost of attendance. This is something that can be a little bit confusing as well, because we have to break down what it would actually cost for a student to stop everything and just attend our school. So what is it going to take? What's it going to cost for living expenses? What is it going to cost for the tuition and fees? What is it going to cost for, housing, food, books, supplies, how to get there with the transportation, and then any personal expenses. So we have to set up that amount. And then with that amount, we cannot over award past that amount. So whatever they qualify for can't be more than the cost of attendance of what it takes to come to Collin. So it'll be different at each school. So that's the biggest difference, is that the housing and food, the supplies and all of that will be very similar at each college, but the tuition and fees is where it's going to be a little bit different for our cost of attendance at Collin versus a university where the tuition is a little bit higher. So the expected family contribution, and that's one of the things that the financial aid department really uses to determine what amount is going to be eligible for the students. So it is a formula that we get off of the FAFSA, that they take all of the tax information, they take all of the asset information of the family. Everything is determined to see what the family can contribute to the school, or to the cost of the school. So financial need. So we talked about cost of attendance, which also can be called the budget. A lot of the times it'll either be cost of attendance or it'll be called a budget. And then you subtract that expected family contribution number from the cost of attendance, and that's where you get what we call unmet need. So that's where you're going to be able to be eligible for any kind of grants and the subsidized loans. So the financial need is the cost of attendance minus the expected family contribution number. Okay, so there's the example. So you see how mainly it's the same from a different university, from Collin versus a university. It's the only thing that's really different is the cost of tuition and fees. But you can see that the financial aid need is going to be a lot different as well because of that. So we could only offer up to $9,200, whereas another university could offer up to $21,240. But there's a set amount that we can offer in financial aid. So to get that whole $21,240 would be difficult because any financial aid cannot offer that much money unless you do a private loan. So that's why it's good to go to a little bit cheaper college. So hopefully you don't have to pay as much out of pocket or get a private loan, which could be a higher interest rate. Okay, so types of financial aid. So the self-help are the loans and the work-study employment. And then the gift aid, which is the free money, is scholarships and grants. So work-study employment, we don't actually give that money right away. So that's if a student goes to the school, they have a certain amount if they qualify for it, because it is a qualification-based aid as well. And if they work on site at the school, they can get money up to that amount. So they can only work a certain amount of hours per week, but it's usually a really good job because A, they have to work around your schedule, which is good, and B, it usually pays more than minimum wage, which is really good. So scholarships, that's another big one. And a lot of the times with scholarships, the first place that you want to go is to your local information. So maybe your job or different clubs or different groups that you're a part of, they might have something, or your high school if you had something there. The college that you plan on attending, they might have something that is pertaining to that student individually, different groups within the college as well. We currently have a foundation scholarship. Other than that, there are outside scholarship resources as well. A big one that we like to tell students to use is fastweb.com. And then you can just scan that and see. But the national scholarships are a little bit more difficult to qualify for because you're going against everybody, whereas the local ones we tell you to go for because it's a lot less of a pool. So groups, clubs, your places of worship, things like that might have things for your student to apply for. The grants. So there are different types of grants. We have the Pell Grant, which is based off of the FAFSA and comes directly from the government, but there's also state grants. So the biggest thing and why we like to do these presentations early is that there's what's called a priority deadline. And a lot of colleges have their priority deadline in January. So they want you to finish the financial aid process for the next fall before January. And then they give whoever qualifies for it the state aid, which is the state grants first. And then when it runs out, then they might not have it. But if you do it before priority deadline, you have a better chance of getting that Texas state grant aid, as well as what you qualify for with the FAFSA. So I already went over this a little bit more. I guess I didn't realize that I would go over it separately, but the work study is a really good option for a student to get, employment, A, to work around their schedule and to get a higher amount of pay, but it is a need-based aid. So if, you'd have to contact your school to know if that's something that you qualify for. For example, at Collin, we don't automatically put it on students' award offer. They would have to request that or see if they qualify for it. So they'd have to come in and ask. Now the loans. This is where I would say a lot of people are a little bit skittish about loans, and I get it, because we don't want to have students taking out money that they don't need to take out. So for Collin, we really try not to have students take out loans because it is such a lower price tuition that a lot of the times people can really handle it with the other aid that they get. We try to limit the amount of loans that are taken out. And so we only offer the subsidized, which is the better loan up front. And to get the unsubsidized, they would have to request it separately, because with everything else, the subsidized should always be able to cover what they need. But if you're looking to pay as a parent, especially if you're looking to put it on a credit card, it's going to be a lot better of an interest rate for this student to take out a loan, whereas your interest rate on a credit card is going to be 14 to 20 something %, whereas the current interest rate for the students, I mean, right now it's 0 because of COVID, but it's 3.73%, which is great. So it builds their credit. If there's no prepayment penalties on these loans. So if they have money, they can already just pay it off. And then when you pay off a loan, that also builds your credit when you pay off the loan. So if you're planning on using a credit card, this is a way better option. So,
Ms. Carlson, you mentioned the term subsidized. Can you tell us what that means in terms of loans?
Yes, so there's three different types of loans for the students to get. And there are direct loans from the government based off of what you qualify for with your FAFSA. Subsidized is the better loan. So the subsidized loan is where the government pays the interest for you on that loan while you're a student. So while you're a student, meaning while you're a student with the school that you took that loan out for, and you're at least in 6 credit hours. So the government sees the student as being a student at least in 6 credit hours for the fall and the spring semester to be the full year. And so they wouldn't say if you didn't go in the summer, that wouldn't count against you. So the fall and the spring. So as long as you keep going in the fall and the spring, and then the fall and the spring, then they would pay the interest for you. Now, once you either graduate, or if you were to drop or withdraw or go below that 6 credit hours, then that puts you in a grace period before you start paying off those loans. So the grace period is 6 months. So if you were to say go in the fall and then skip the spring and then come back the next fall, you'll be finished in December. So January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August. So you see, you've already passed that 6-month grace period. So your loans would go into repayment if you were to do that. So you just have to remember that with any loans, you have a 6-month grace period. Now, so the government would be paying the interest on the subsidized, and then the unsubsidized loan is where the interest is accruing the whole time as soon as you get that first disbursement. So you have the option if you want to pay, because like I said, these loans are prepayment penalty. There's no, you can pay them off along with it, or you can, wait, and the interest is just going to be accruing, so it will be more, but you don't have to pay the interest while it's accruing. But again, it does have that 6-month grace period after you complete or withdraw or drop. And then there's the PLUS loans. So let me just go over that. The PLUS loan is the parent loan for undergraduate student, where if there isn't enough money, which some places, like I said, because of the cost of attendance and that difference, there might be a big gap, because the dependent students where they have to use their parents' information can only get up to $5,500 of any loan. So it's $3,500 for subsidized and $2,000 for unsubsidized for people that have unmet need, but total, you can only get $5,500 as a dependent student between the two, subsidized versus unsubsidized, based on your eligibility. So if you have something that costs more than $5,500 for a year, which universities typically do, there's a gap. And so if you don't qualify for Pell Grant and you only qualify for just say the $5,500 and it's all unsubsidized, you can have a an amount that would have to either be covered with cash payments, or a parent can take out the parent loan for undergraduate students. And it is a credit-based loan, and you can take out as much up to the cost of attendance to cover, or you can just do what it takes to cover the cost of the actual tuition. So you don't have to go that full cost of attendance, because that's not actually the charge of the school. You can just take out whatever it takes to cover the tuition fees and then the books that they might need. So sources of financial aid: the federal government, which is where we get from the FAFSA; the states, which is that grant issue that I was talking about. There are some state grants that are based off of priority deadline that they give out. College and universities, some of them have their own private loan that you could possibly get if it doesn't cover. There's private sources, there's private loans. They're kind of starting to cut those down though. For example, Collin does not use outside loans except for one, and we have a very specific way that you have to go about it. There used to be a lot of different private lenders out there. So you would go through your financial aid and find out which lender you are able to use. And then employers, there's a lot of employers that will just make payments for the students, or put it on a scholarship type thing where they would pay per quarter or per semester. So the largest source of financial aid, primarily basis on financial aid must apply each year using the FAFSA. Eligibility requirements must be met. Okay, so based on this, my take on this is the FAFSA is going to be the biggest thing that you want to do every year. October 1st, every single year, you will do a new FAFSA. So that's when you really need to take into consideration, when you're setting up your student ID, your FSA user ID, that the student sets up their own with their own email account, and the parent sets up their own, because even after the parents are no longer involved and the student becomes an independent student, they're going to need access to this FSA user ID for the FAFSA. Even if they're going to school in 20 years, they're going to be still using this login. So they need to have their own, you need to have your own as a parent. There is a lot of, this is where it can get confusing for a lot of people. There's so many different avenues of aid, and we've kind of already gone over a lot of these, but there's a few that are very, there's so few people that actually use them, but if you don't know about them, then you don't know to ask. So for example, the Iraq-Afghanistan Service Grant. So if you don't know about that grant, then you wouldn't know to ask about it. So if somebody was to have served and be killed in one of the wars, then there's different things that we can do for that. The SEOG grant, that is from the government as well. So not all schools have the FSEOG program. So again, these are all the things that are out there, but not all schools have everything. With the FSEOG, sometimes they have the different state aid. And so it just kind of depends on that one. We talked about the direct loans. We talked about the plus loans. Teach grant, again, these are all things depending on if you're in a certain degree plan. So a lot of the times, if they have certain degree plans, they might email those students separately, the financial aid office might, to see if you qualify for that and reach out to you about it. So.
And if I may add, this is Miss James. I know as she said, these can seem like a lot, complete your FAFSA, complete your application for admission, and then you can reach out to the financial aid office of the college you're applying to, for example, Collin. And
Yes.
once they have those applications on file, they can guide you through what you may qualify for. But you got to do
Exactly.
that FAFSA before they have, in order for them to do that.
And it's also a good thing to know that when you do fill out the FAFSA, it does take about 3 to 5 business days for it to transfer to whatever school that you sent it to. So if you filled it out today, then you're going to want to follow up, on Friday at the earliest, but probably Monday, as it is a government website that you're filling it out, and it has to link and filter through to the actual college. So just give it a little bit of time before you follow up. So these are different things with the state. Requirements are based off of residency, usually for application, and also to set the tuition and fee amount. So if you are considered in-state resident, it's going to change the amount of tuition that you pay versus if you're an out-of-county or out-of-state resident, especially the cost is going to be a lot different. So the one thing that I would say about that is that each school could be different, especially if you're in Texas. You're going to go off of Apply Texas, and something that you put on there, it could be a simple question that you answer a little bit off, or you were confused by it. It could change the eligibility of your residency. So whereas you're thinking you filled it out right, and why am I being charged so much? I thought Collin was, a lot cheaper than other schools. Well, maybe something you put triggered and didn't get you as an in-state and county resident. So you'd have to make sure and follow up with the admissions office to see if your residency was correct. And if it's not, then obviously you can update it, but there's certain timelines at each school of when you have to have residency updated by, or for that semester you would be charged the higher amount. So definitely follow up with each individual department to make sure that you have everything in line and in order before you start that semester. So award aid is based on the merit and the need. So sometimes it is based off of GPA, and we have what's called satisfactory academic progress standing. There are separate standings for academic versus financial aid. So whereas the student might be okay with their academics, their financial aid SAP status might not be because of completion ratio. So one thing I would say about financial aid is that we go off of GPA, we go off of completion ratio, which is your credits attempted versus the credit hours earned. So you would take the amount earned divided by the amount attempted, and that's your percentage. So for us, we require you to complete 67% of all classes to maintain a good standing with financial aid and at least a 2.0 GPA. So that's where it's both merit and need, because even if you are eligible with the FAFSA and they say, yes, you still have need, you still have the eligibility for us and you still have money remaining at that specific campus or at that specific university, you might not have the merit to qualify for those funds, even though you qualify for it with the government. So I hope that makes sense. And then the third SAP standing for us, which is again, satisfactory academic progress. I want to make sure everybody knows what that stands for. But the third one is based off of the amount of credit hours that you take at the school. So we can only give, and this is every single school, financial aid can only give up to 150% of the hours that it takes to get whatever degree that you are in. So there's a lot of degrees at a school. So if you're in a certificate program, sometimes those are only 30 credit hours. So with 30 credit hours, 150% of that is 45 credit hours. So if you were to pass 45 credit hours, you would be cut off from financial aid. And so you might think, oh man, I thought I was trying to get my associate's degree, but you picked the wrong degree and are in the certificate program. So all you'd have to do is change your degree, and then you'd have a higher credit hour amount to receive aid. So you really always need to make sure that you know what degree you're in, where you are with your GPA, where you are with your completion ratio. And for Collin, we send out an email every single semester at the end with your SAP status that shows all of those things. But you're really going to want to know that at each school that you go to, what they do to give you that information so that you're always on track. We use information from the FAFSA and state aid applications, and the deadlines vary by state, but a lot of the times, like I said, the priority deadline is January, but then you can fill out a FAFSA up until through the semester that you're in. So as long as you're in classes that semester, you could still complete the FAFSA. So if you paid for the school up front and thought maybe you didn't need it or anything like that, and then halfway through, oh, I need something, you could still fill it out and get the financial aid. But as long as you are current and have already paid for it. So. Okay, so the Texas state and programs, we have a lot of different grants, like I said, with the state, which is where you would want to fill it out before the priority deadline, because this is where the state aid from Texas comes into play, is with that priority deadline, because the FAFSA you get as long as you qualify for it and you're eligible with your merit at the school. But with state aid, we give it out until it's gone, and then it's gone. So that's why you really want to get in early. You want to get your FAFSA done, and the FAFSA is not all that you have to do. So once you've done the FAFSA, follow up with your financial aid office and say, is there anything else that I need to do? Because a lot of the times it's just a small thing. For example, we have to have a high school transcript. And sometimes students will say, well, I ordered it online, but it goes to our admissions office and we never see it. So we also need a copy of that. And admissions gets them right upon graduation from the college or from the high school. And then they have thousands that they have to upload for us to be able to see. Well, that takes a while to do. So unfortunately with that, we won't be able to get the financial aid complete until we have cleared that high school transcript. So it's a simple thing, but if we don't have it because admissions hasn't gotten to it yet, it's just always best if you order one for yourself and get it sent to you and then email it to them directly, because we don't have to have the official for financial aid, but we have to have a copy of the final. So just FYI, that might not be for any other school, but that's Collin specific that we would need. So these are the Texas state programs. There are loans as well as grants, but most of them are based upon that priority deadline. I feel like I've gone over this already, but both merit and need, aid, maybe gift or self-help aid, we've gone over that. FAFSA or institutional applications. There's some places that will do institutional applications that have their own financial aid. So that's what they're talking about with that. But most of the time they go simply with the FAFSA. But if you haven't met your need or you haven't done, if you haven't gotten enough to cover, then just talk to your individual institution about what other aid might be available. And then the deadlines and application requirements definitely vary by the institution, but they're pretty similar in where you can get it as long as you're still going to class and you've paid for it out of pocket already.
This question was asked in the chat and it pertains to this. The question was about, do you need to do the FAFSA or is that taken into account with scholarships or merit aid?
That's a great question.
A lot of schools in the experience that I've had require the FAFSA to be completed even to consider you for scholarship. So even if you think, well, I don't think we're going to qualify for grants based on our family's income, the school may still want a FAFSA on file in order to give you merit-based scholarships. And so it's still a good idea to complete the FAFSA. And as it says here on the screen, a lot of schools have an additional institutional scholarship application. So visit those school websites. Collin has scholarships as well. and I think you're going to get to those towards the end. Visit the websites of those schools, and if you have questions about that.
Absolutely. And the other piece of that is that we just had a CARES grant that was given to us by the government because of COVID-19. And we had to determine what our criteria were to give that out. Now here, we gave it to anybody that was in school that had a FAFSA on file. As long as you were going to school and had a FAFSA, even if the student was not making their academic progress, as long as they were still going to school, because that means they're trying and they paid out of pocket to try to get better and try to get, through their academic progress standing and get better. So we were actually able to give to people that didn't qualify based on their merit because they had a FAFSA on file. So always do the FAFSA because it could help you with other aid that comes in. But yes, it's basically because we still have to see what you qualify for based on the cost of attendance minus what you would get from the FAFSA. So okay, so private sources. Again, this is mostly for scholarship funding or for repayment, things like that. Your foundations, businesses, churches, civic and charitable organizations, those are where you're going to want to find out if they have any kind of scholarship aid to give. There is usually a deadline that they give you to apply for that kind of a scholarship. And then they might go over this later in this slideshow, but the biggest thing is that if you go local, you're going to be less likely to come across a scam. And unfortunately, in today's world, we have a lot of scammers. And especially when it comes to aid, even though it's mostly through the federal government with financial aid, there are still people that set up a website that help you fill out the application. But the FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. So if anybody gets to a site because you just Googled FAFSA and it takes you to a site and they ask you for a payment to help you fill out the FAFSA, you're on the wrong website. Studentaid.gov, that is our financial aid website. If they ever ask you for money to get free money, free, it should never cost anything. So that goes with scholarships as well. You should never pay even to hold your spot or put you in line to be the next one to get it. Nothing. You should never pay to get aid. Okay.
And we have on our Plano Senior High counseling website, we have a database that is updated regularly. We're adding to it every day with a lot of private and local scholarships that you can take a look at.
Great. That's really good. And so going through your own personal school, that's going to be a big help to try to stay away from those scams. But if you find any scams, definitely try to let somebody know so that we can put some information out there about that website to not go to it. And there's a place to report it nationally as well. All right, FAFSA time. So the FAFSA is ever changing. So this year's FAFSA versus next year's FAFSA could be different. So don't get too attached to filling it out a certain way because I know that they're looking to change it a little bit with the IRS information. So this year's going to be a little bit different than next year, I would say, but we'll just worry about this year right now. So for the FAFSA, everybody right now that's a senior will definitely want to fill out the 2022-2023 FAFSA. If you plan on starting in the summer, then you're also going to have to do the 2021-2022 FAFSA because it is a little bit of a changeover period at that time. So if you're going to do the summer classes, you're going to want to do both applications. If you're just starting in the fall, then just do the 2022-2023 FAFSA. So it's the application and it's on the Department of Education website, which is called Federal Student Aid. So You definitely don't want to go to any other websites. But if you do type FAFSA, it should take you to this website, but just make sure you look for federal student aid. Okay. And then, like I have told you before, the federal student aid website, you have the same username and password all throughout your years of college. So make sure you have your own and parents have their own. So our FSA ID is going to be at a different website than the FAFSA, but it's all through federal student aid. So fsaid.ed.gov is for the user name and password, which is the FSA ID. Make sure and set that up first. And I would do it as, the student setting up their own and parents setting up their own, because that's how you electronically sign that application when you're complete and to submit it to us. Otherwise, you're going to have to print out a page and send it in to the Department of Education, and then it takes a while for them to get your signature processed, or you'd have to go to the school and they'd have to manually do it with a form. So definitely do this. It's a lot easier and it takes a lot less time. All right, so FAFSA.gov, and that's actually not correct. We'll have to update that. It's studentaid.gov, but if you do FAFSA.gov, it's going to take you to studentaid.gov. Okay, thank you. Studentaid.gov, perfect. So that's how you apply for the application. So free application for federal student aid. Like I said, it is free. That is the key word. It is a free application. So if anybody says you now owe me for doing this, you're on the wrong website. So it does ask for all of your personal information as the student: name, address, phone number, birthday, social security number, all of that information. And then they use that information as well as the tax information, the assets, to come up with that EFC that we talked about, the expected family contribution number. And then we use that EFC as the college to determine on a chart, because we do have a chart from the Department of Education that says if they have this EFC, this is how much Pell Grant that they get for the year. So we aren't making the numbers up. It's all based off of a chart that's online, and we can see based on that number that your FAFSA produces, this is how much you qualify for. And it's available in English and Spanish online and on the phone. I believe they have one on the mobile app as well now. The FAFSA can be filed anytime during the academic year, but no earlier than October 1st. So every October 1st, do your new FAFSA application for the next fall, every single year. And it'll be based off of the prior tax year. So this year we'll be going off of the 2020 tax information. And then next year would be 2021 and so forth. Kind of already said this, but they do have an application on the web, and then they do have the mobile app, which is awesome. It has a few bugs on the app more so, but it does work. They're working through everything. It's not a big issue, but I'm more of an internet user myself, not my phone. So you get to the FAFSA, and this is where you go. So if you're a new user, obviously you click the start here. If you're returning, if you've ever done a previous year's FAFSA, that's where you do the login. If you already have your FSA user ID set up and you've done a previous one. So that's how you know which one to push on there. And then it's pretty simple in where they have you check if you are the user or if you're the parent. So you can, complete your section of the FAFSA. The great part is that if you cannot complete it in one sitting, because sometimes you don't have all the information that you need to complete it right then, you can click on save and exit. And then when you come back, you can pick up where you are again, and it'll be exactly where you left off. they will ask you to create a save key, which is usually a 4-digit number, at least a 4-digit number, so that the next time you come back, then you have to click that number in as well, which is different than your user ID and password. So that is going to be an additional thing you'll need to remember. If you do stop that application, you'll have to remember what your save key was. All right, the IRS Data Retrieval tool is awesome. If you can and are eligible to use it, there are a few reasons that you would not be eligible to use it, but if you can use it, I would definitely suggest using it. It immediately transfers your information from that tax year based off of your username and password, electronic signature, and if you filed correctly. So if you are married and you did married filing jointly, you would be eligible to use it. If you're single or widowed and you have head of household and you're single, as in you're not married or remarried, you'd be able to use it. But if you filed head of household and now you're married, whereas you weren't before, then you wouldn't be eligible because you have to use your new spouse's information as well. And same with married filing jointly. It will only pull one person's tax information onto there. So married filing separately is not able to use it because then you have to pull in your spouse's information as well. So if you have two but didn't file together because of whatever situation that you're in, you would not be eligible to use it. But if you are single or married filing jointly or widowed or head of household and you're still single or married in that same filing jointly, you would be able to use it. And it will transfer all of your information from that year, so you don't have to worry about anything except for your individual wages. So if you are married, then you would have to know your individual wages for the year that you made versus how much your spouse made. So you would need to have your W-2 information in front of you to know what your information was, or your 1099s as well. Participation is voluntary and student chooses whether or not to transfer data to FAFSA on the web. So you don't have to use this if you'd rather do it manually. Each question asks and tells you which line from the 1040 to look at to fill in that answer. So it's really a great tool if you can use it, but if you can't, for whatever reason, each individual question is going to say 1040 line 3 minus 1040 schedule 2 line 6. So it'll tell you exactly what you need to look at on your tax document to fill out that section. Don't let it stress you out. IRS will authenticate taxpayers' identity. The big thing with that is that if you do click on, I want to use the IRS Data Retrieval tool, they will ask, what address did you file that tax year? So if you don't have your taxes in front of you and you don't remember which address you were at, if you moved, you will need to know what address you filed that year and put it exactly as. I always tell people to put it exactly as it's typed out on your tax form. So if it's in all caps, type it in all caps. If road is spelled out, spell out road. If it's only RD, put RD. Make sure that it matches, and then hopefully you won't have an issue transferring your information. If the tax record's found, it transfers and populates it into the FAFSA automatically, and it reduces the amount of documents requested by financial aid. That is the biggest key of why you want to use it, is that it lessens your chances of being selected for what we call verification. And verification is about 30% of all people that fill out a FAFSA, and it's random by the Department of Education based on your answers. If something doesn't match, you could be flagged for it. So, if you're married now, but you filed head of household, it's going to flag. It's going to say what's going on. So you don't want to be flagged if possible. It's not a bad thing to be flagged, but we have to require documentation to show what's correct. Sometimes it might be a marriage document. Sometimes it could be a divorce decree. Sometimes it could be that you are separated and have two different addresses. So it all depends on what your specific situation is, but if you can use the IRS Data Retrieval tool, use it, because it would lessen your chances of being selected for verification. Oh, I think I just went over all of this. So those are the specific cases, but did not indicate FAFSA, a tax return was completed. So if you said will not file or will file instead of already completed, at this point, I think all deadlines have passed for having to file taxes for 2020. In that case, they're saying, why are you saying going to file? You should have already filed. So it could be just that you need to go make a correction saying that you already did file. Maybe you just answered a question wrong. Marriage date is later. First three digits of the social security number, okay. Filed a non-US tax return, definitely non-US tax returns, out of country tax returns are not going to transfer because it's not through the IRS. And then married and filed head of household or filed separate returns. Neither married parent entered a valid social, so they would have to verify your citizenship or your SSA information first. And yeah, that's.
And I'd just like to add, because I know this all can feel super overwhelming and confusing. If you're in one of these categories where you can't use the data retrieval tool, does not mean that you can't complete the FAFSA or any of that. It just means that you have to do it the old way. Where you have
the old school way. Yes, I love that you put that. The old school way, manually. But again,
the
like
way I did it back when I was.
Yes,
you have to
it
do it
does still tell you exactly which line to look at. So it's really not a difficult thing. The only thing you have to remember is that if you don't qualify for it and you have two separate returns for parents, you have to add both of the returns information together to put on the lines. Except for the wages, of course, you're separating who made what on when it asks for the wage information, but it will tell you that. But other than that, the adjusted gross income, the taxes paid, all of that kind of stuff would need to be added from both parents onto that one box. That's what makes it a little bit more confusing if you do have two returns, but just add them together, put it on there. Student information. So they're going to check a lot of things when the FAFSA is submitted. They're going to check the citizenship status. They're going to check the social security information. They're going to check if you have high school or GED or homeschool option selected. They're going to check if you have an eligible program or an eligible school, which is, I think I said that before, where you have to be in a degree program to receive financial aid. You cannot just be non-degree seeking. You have to select an actual program. There are some programs at certain schools that do not qualify for financial aid based on either credit hours being too low or the program's just not approved or accredited yet. So for Collin, we have a few certificate programs that are too few of hours and don't qualify. So the biggest thing with that is I always suggest to try to get an associate's degree. Now, if you want to do a certificate program, that's fine. There's a lot of associative applied science programs that have the certificate program within the degree. So you still have, for your 150 max hours of financial aid, you still have the eligibility of an associate degree program with that, but you can still just get that certificate program. And then if you want to continue, you keep going and get your associates. So I just always suggest to sign up for an associate degree at our school in particular. Now with other schools, obviously it's going to be different. If you're at a 4-year, most of the time you're signing up for a bachelor's program, but just really look into that. Do I use my parents' information on the FAFSA? There's always a little bit of a question on if you are independent versus dependent. And students all the time will say, you know, my parents don't pay my bills, I pay for my own, I file my own taxes, I make my own money. That does not make you independent. It makes you financially responsible, which is amazing, and that's awesome. But with the government, we don't set that. It's the government's questions, and whatever you answer for that, if you are not married, if you don't have a child that you support more than 50%, if you're not a veteran, if you were never in foster care, if you weren't orphaned or a ward of the court, if you weren't in a legal guardianship or emancipated from parents, you're still dependent on your parents, because parents have the ability to file you as a dependent up until you're 24 for tax information purposes, and they can claim you on their car insurance. So you're still considered dependent, even if you are living on your own, and as long as you still have, you know, a relationship with your parents. Of course, if there's things that happened and there are police reports of things, or if you're living with a family member because of those things and you have documentation, please go and talk to your financial aid office, because if that's the reason, there's a possibility that you qualify for other things that we can work with you on with dependency, but you need to talk to your financial aid office individually about your specific situation. Signatures. Like I said before, you're going to want to do that FSA user ID to electronically sign the FAFSA, because that takes a lot less time than physically signing a printed off form at the end of the FAFSA and sending it to the Department of Education to process, because everybody's behind. The FAFSA errors that are most common: Social Security numbers. And this is the biggest one that if you do mess up, we actually can't correct it. If you swapped a number and, you know, even if it's just the last two, it's not going to match with the SSA. And they're going to kick it back and say, flag, Social Security number does not match with that name and that birthday. And then we're going to ask you to see your Social Security card. And if it does not match and you put the wrong number, you're going to have to actually complete an entire new FAFSA, because you can't even update your own. If you mess up on a social, that is going to be the biggest one, because you're going to have to do the most work and redo the entire application again with your correct FAFSA. The divorced, widowed, remarried, parental information. So the biggest thing with this that gets confusing is that some students think, well, my mom and my dad. Now, if mom and dad are no longer together, but they still think my mom and my dad, they're going to say, you know, put those parents on the FAFSA. Whereas if you're remarried, they want to know your new spouse information. So you have to list the first initial, last name, Social Security number, birthday of parents. And sometimes the student will put, you know, mom and dad instead of mom and stepdad, or dad and stepmom. So if your parent is remarried, they want to know who is in that household. That's how you have to think about it, is who's in that household. And then earned income by parents. And that's where the information, sometimes the student, well, let's just say, sometimes parents fill the FAFSA out for their child. This is where we want to really say, no, make them do it. Parents aren't supposed to know the FSA user ID for the student. That is one of the things that you're clicking on and agreeing to, that you're not sharing your information with somebody and that you are that user. If you're the parent and you're doing it, you're signing that, that's a federal offense. So let's just remember that. Make the student do it, make them do it. And so the biggest mistake with that, because parents are filling it out, they're filling it out with their information. So they're putting their tax information under the student tax information section and under the parent tax information section. So if you're putting your parent information under student and parent, that doubles your income information on the FAFSA, which makes your EFC higher, which means you don't get as much qualifications. So you see where that can mess things up. They are in fact asking if the student themselves worked in 2020 or not. And if they didn't, then you just put will not file and put a 0 in the income. But they do ask for the student's information specifically. So the untaxed income, income taxes paid, household size, those are all things that do get messed up, mainly because people aren't using the IRS Data Retrieval tool. But if you use it, and otherwise, if you're putting it under the student's information, that's usually why it's messed up. Household size, that one can be tricky because sometimes people put in a higher number than what really qualifies based on the government's definition of household size. So if you have, for example, my sister was living with me last year, but she worked, she paid for her own, self, and she paid for her kids. So I can't claim her as being in my household because I'm not paying more than 50% of her living. So that's where it gets, if your grandparent is living with you, do they get benefits from the state? If they do, they cannot count in the household. If they have income coming in, they cannot count in the household. If the student is 25 and they're listed as independent on the FAFSA, you can't claim them as part of the household on your other student that's 18 that, is dependent. So an independent student cannot be counted, even if they're still living at home, on the FAFSA of the dependent. So there are specific guidelines on the FAFSA with the household size. So just if you have questions, there's always a little circle that has a question mark next to each question. Click on it. It will break it down for you exactly who you can and cannot count in the household. Real estate and investment net worth, again, that is messed up a lot. But again, if you have questions on if it counts on the FAFSA, click on the question next to it with the circle and the question mark, because it will break down exactly what you have to report and what you don't. Making corrections. This is where you want to really keep in mind what your FSA user ID and password are. That's the hardest thing, is when people try to make corrections and they don't remember that information, and then they call the school, and we can't help you get that because it's a government website. We can help look at your file that you submitted to us based on the school code that you input on your FAFSA, but we can't actually give you help with getting your password for your username and logging in, because that is a government website. So you would have to contact Federal Student Aid, and they do have a phone number and they do have a contact us page on studentaid.gov that you'd have to go through. Updating the SAR. So the SAR is a student aid report that is mailed to the student. Now it's not mailed to every single student, but they will mail it to a student if they have questions about what you put on the FAFSA. And then if you see that you made a mistake when you're reviewing that report, then you could go into your FAFSA and make a correction based off of what you see that was wrong. And then, or you could submit information to your specific school and we can make corrections based off of the documentation you give us. So, special circumstances. Now, this has gotten a lot more prevalent because of COVID. If you had, not worked a lot in, let's say, 2020, well, we're using our 2020 taxes, so it's really going to show what happened in 2020. So if you are in a different situation now than you were in 2020, say you did keep working through COVID, and now they just finally had terminations or layoffs or anything like that, and now you're in a different situation to where it's in more need, you can contact your individual school and explain your circumstances. There's a lot of different circumstances that could possibly qualify for a special circumstance. Remember, it's going to be a lot of paperwork because it is auditing by the Department of Education. We have to be able to prove that you are in a different circumstance now than what your tax information showed. but just contact your school. These are some of the circumstances. Medical, dental expenses, if they're really significant, parent or spouse death, loss of employment, because, you know, if you were married and your spouse died, then, you know, you filed as married filing jointly, and that's not fair because that spouse's income is no longer prevalent in your current situation. So you have to put what's on your tax information from 2020. You can't make that change yourself. That's what the special circumstance would be, to where we would have to make the correction based off the information that you give us in the paperwork. Loss of employment. Now, loss of employment does not mean I quit my job. If you chose to leave, that is not a special circumstance. Some people will say, well, I just wanted to be a full-time student and dedicate everything to being a student. That is not a special circumstance. You chose to leave your job, and you just have to go based off of the last year's taxes, and the 2021 information would obviously be different when you fill out the FAFSA that uses the 2021. So that's how they kind of go off of that. But a divorce, extraordinary dependent care, secondary tuition for school, student cannot obtain parental information. Now, this isn't where a student or the parent just says, I'm not giving you my tax information. They have a good relationship. They're just trying to make them independent. That's not a special circumstance. If you still have a good relationship with your parent and you still speak to them, that does not qualify. It's where you have a police report, or if you're living with aunt or uncle because you don't know your parents, or, you know, there's, you know what I'm saying? There are special circumstances to where you won't be able to get parent information. So just contact your school and then discuss it privately with the financial aid team. And follow up with your school. Always, always, always follow up. We are available for questions at any time during the day when we're open, of course, but if we're not open, we're available by email, and we will get back to you within 24 to 48 hours. And I would say that that's typical for every single financial aid office. Scholarships. So I did speak about scholarships before. Our current one is the Foundation Scholarship, and it's currently open for the next spring, but it will open up in February for the fall. So you're going to want to start looking, if you're going to Collin in the spring, for fall scholarships and complete the application at that time. Always check in with your school to see if they have a scholarship as well, to know if there's a deadline that you need to fill out that scholarship for next fall, because it's usually pretty early that you have to fill out that application. TASFA. So there are students that are not citizens that don't qualify based on citizenship. You would have to go through the admissions office for us to find out if you qualify for the TASFA, because there are requirements. You have to have completed a certain amount of years in Texas at a high school in Texas. You have to graduate from a Texas high school. There are certain qualifications, but if you do meet that qualification, then there is a Texas application for student financial aid and for state financial aid, which is through the Texas state grants, which is great. We have the paperwork in our office, which is very similar to the FAFSA with the questions and things like that. It still will go off tax information and everything. So this kind of breaks down if you're eligible for FAFSA versus TASFA. You cannot do both. And that's something that, you know, you would just want to know, is that if you qualify for one, then you will not qualify for the other. If you don't qualify for the FAFSA, it is a good idea to look into see if you are qualified for the TASFA. But those are the different specific identifications that will say, and documents that will say if you are qualified or not.
And I'd just like to stress that, because I've actually answered that question a couple times, I think, in the chat. A lot of people, because of the name, think that in order to qualify for financial aid from the state, they have to do both the FAFSA and the TASFA. That is not correct. The TASFA is specifically for people who are not eligible to complete the FAFSA. Otherwise, your FAFSA will be used for federal and state aid. And if you're unsure about that, you can come talk to your counselor here on campus privately, and he or she can help you determine which one of these is right for you.
Thank you. So this is the end, of course, and we obviously would love anybody to come to Collin, but no pressure. We just give you the information and you decide where you're going to go and where you're going to be successful. And we wish you the best of luck with your future. And we're just so proud of everyone that really continues and goes to college. And thank you guys for letting me present. And if you ever have questions, please reach out. It doesn't matter if you're going to Collin or not. You can always contact us and we can answer general questions. But if anybody has questions that I didn't go over, you can ask it in the chat right now and I can try to answer. But yeah, thank you for letting me present.
Thank you again. And like she said, we'll hang out for a few more minutes for those that have questions, but thank you again for presenting with us. And thank you for those who were here tonight. I know there's a lot going on, you know, it's homecoming week, and thank you for taking the time to be here. And we will be posting this for your reference on our website so that you can go back and look at the details.
Thank you, everybody. I'm glad it helped. Definitely love doing this. I'm sad that it's not in person, but maybe again in the future when everybody feels more safe.
The FAFSA deadline is not October 15th. The FAFSA opened up on October 1st. So it just opened for, so if you're a senior right now, then it's available to you to complete. Now, as she mentioned, a lot of schools have priority financial aid deadlines. So you may want to get on that so that you can get that first come, first serve financial aid. But
yeah, usually those are in January.
Yeah, a lot of priority deadlines.
But that's not the deadline. You can still complete it.
Yes.
As long as you're in school that semester, even if you started that semester and you're in school and you paid out of pocket and now you're saying, oh, maybe I need some money, you can still complete it as long as you're still in school during that semester.
I think the answer to that is no. If you complete the FAFSA and you list your schools, then that will be used to qualify you for state aid as well as federal aid. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, we have to go off of your FAFSA information to give state aid because it is based off of qualification with the cost of attendance minus the EFC, which gives you your need base. And then we can't go above the cost of attendance. So we would obviously give you as many grants first as possible. Whatever you qualify for with grants is going to be offered first, then the loans, then, you know, work study and things like that.
I think
2020 is another deadline on October 15th.
Is there a question of Patty Hugh?
Yeah, I'm not very good typer.
Okay.
So can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
So I haven't had a chance to fill out the FAFSA.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I heard during the presentation that you have to enter the school you want this information to send to.
Yes.
And is there like you don't really know what schools yet? So is that a required thing that you must enter the schools you wanted to?
So you have to enter at least one school for the
at least one school
process.
Okay.
Yes, but you can enter up to 10 schools. And
okay.
It used to be that schools would use that list to determine who would get extra aid. Mm-hmm. But now the FAFSA does not let schools see anybody else that you put on the FAFSA, so they can no longer do that. They
Oh,
can no
okay.
longer see if you put them first or if you put them last, to determine what aid they wanted to give you from their institution. No, they can't do that anymore. So that's the great part. You can put up to 10 schools, and if you don't go to their school, great, but you can only accept the financial aid from one school. So if you are working with a few different schools, only go through the actual process with the school that you're going to go to. Because if you accidentally accept it from 2 schools and they both order the aid, they're both going to cancel the aid. And then if you're already in classes with one of the schools, you get kicked out and dropped all the classes. And then that just is a nightmare trying to get back enrolled and have the other school cancel them in the national database. And
Oh, so you're saying that once the school makes an offer to you, that you have to accept it?
Yes.
Okay.
You don't have to accept the offer, but she's saying don't accept.
Don't accept it at 2.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Only accept the offer for 1.
Okay. So you can only accept 1. Oh, I see. So you can't accept more aid. Sounds like. Okay.
Yeah, you can't receive aid at 2 schools at the same time.
Okay. Well, which makes sense, but I guess,
So
you know.
if you were to go to one school in the fall, you can cancel after you receive the aid for the fall at that school and then transfer the aid to the other school.
Okay.
So there you can go to a different school fall versus spring. And then the other piece I would say is that there are 4-year universities that do what's called a consortium agreement, to where if you go to their school and you're only going 6 credit hours at their school, you can do an agreement with them to say, hey, I'm going to take 6 credit hours at Collin. I'm going to pay out of my pocket to go to Collin, but I'm going to tell you these are the 6 credit hours. And then you can be considered a full-time student at that 4-year university to get the full-time amount of aid.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So that's
Thanks
the
for
cool
that
part,
tip.
is that there is a connection if you are going to 2 schools. Not all schools do it. So if you're going to Dallas College and Collin College, we don't have a consortium. Usually it's a 4-year to a 2-year. So and you have to pay out of pocket to one of the schools, and then you get the aid for the full-time or whatever total amount of credit hours at the main school that you're going to.
But can you go back in and add schools to the FAFSA later?
Yes.
So let's say you only put 2 when you fill it out. Can you log back in and add schools later?
Yep, it's just another correction. So the more corrections that you make, the higher the chances that you'll get selected for verification. So if you weren't before and you make a correction, you could possibly enter yourself into that verification situation and then have to prove what's on your FAFSA, even though you already received funds at the school. It could take it away if you answered incorrectly, and then we verify, you could have an issue there. So
Thank you.
mm-hmm. So taxes due for 2020, there's another deadline. So are you saying that there was an extension given for taxes being filed again to October 15th?
I think that's what they were talking about.
Okay, so, all right, if you haven't filed your 2020 taxes, wait till you do in a few days and then do your FAFSA, because you're still going to be done in plenty of time to have the priority deadline before January, but finish your taxes first for sure, because otherwise you're going to have to make a correction again saying that you completed once you complete